His polished Oxford shoes made no sound on the thick carpet as he stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 42nd floor of Lynch Pharmaceuticals headquarters. At 42, his salt-and-pepper hair and tailored Tom Ford suit gave him an air of authority that matched his position as CEO of the pharmaceutical giant his grandfather had built from nothing. The company's logo, a stylized double helix in blue and silver, caught the dying sunlight, rotating slowly on the building across the street. Grant allowed himself a moment of pride as he remembered his grandfather's stories about starting the company in a cramped Brooklyn garage. Now, that humble beginning had transformed into a billion-dollar enterprise at the forefront of medical innovation. His phone buzzed quietly in his pocket. A text from Christina. Emma won first place in her science fair. Marcus helped her with the presentation. Wish you could have been there. Red heart. A smile tugged at his lips as he typed back, "That's my girl. We'll try to be home early to celebrate. Love you both." The mention of Marcus warmed his heart. Though not his biological son, the 10-year-old had become every bit his child over the 8 years of marriage to Christina. He'd been there for Marcus's first Little League game, his first broken bone, and countless bedtime stories. Sometimes he forgot that Marcus wasn't his by blood. The boy's place in his heart was just as secure as his 7-year-old daughter Emma's. A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. Violet Wells, his assistant of 15 years, stood in the doorway. Her perfectly pressed charcoal blazer and the iPad she perpetually carried were as much a part of her as her efficiently kind demeanor. "Mr. Lynch?" She adjusted her tortoiseshell glasses with practiced precision. "The board members are waiting in conference room A for the quarterly review. They seem..." She paused, choosing her words carefully, particularly interested in discussing the timeline for the cancer treatment trials. Grant suppressed a sigh. The tension with the board over the cancer drugs development had been building for months. Thomas Wynne, especially, had been pushing for faster trials and quicker market release, despite Grant's insistence on thorough testing. "Thank you, Violet. Could you have Jerry from R&D send up the latest trial results? And perhaps some coffee?" "Already done, sir." Violet's efficiency was legendary within the company. "And I took the liberty of having sandwiches brought in. The last time you discussed timelines with Mr. Sullivan, the meeting ran through lunch." Grant straightened his blue silk tie, a Father's Day gift from Marcus and Emma, and gathered his thoughts. The board members had been his father's closest friends and advisors. Thomas Wynne, with his Harvard Business School pedigree and old money connections. Byron Sullivan, whose legal expertise had helped navigate countless regulatory challenges. Oliver Marks, whose financial acumen had steered them through 2 recessions. And Spencer Carr, whose pharmaceutical background had proved invaluable in their research and development strategies. They'd been his mentors after his father's sudden death 5 years ago, helping him step into the role of CEO at 37. But lately, something felt different. Their pushback against his careful approach to the cancer drug trials seemed out of character for men who had always prioritized safety and efficacy over profit. As he walked toward conference room A, he passed the wall of photos chronicling the company's history. His grandfather in that famous Brooklyn garage, surrounded by primitive lab equipment. His father shaking hands with the governor at the opening of their first major research facility. And himself, accepting the CEO position after his father's heart attack, looking younger and more uncertain than he remembered feeling. The cancer treatment project had been his father's dream, 15 years of research, countless setbacks, and finally, a breakthrough that could revolutionize cancer therapy. The pressure from Gallagher Biotech, their main competitor, had been intense. Marshall Gallagher himself had made 3 acquisition attempts in the past year alone, each more aggressive than the last. Through the glass walls of conference room A, Grant could see the board members gathered around the mahogany table. Thomas Wynne was gesturing animatedly, his silver hair catching the fluorescent light. Byron Sullivan sat with his usual stoic expression, while Oliver Marks studied something on his tablet with unusual intensity. Spencer Carr was on his phone, his face turned away from the others. Grant took a deep breath, centering himself. The latest trial results were promising, revolutionary, even. But he wouldn't rush this to market. Not when people's lives were at stake. His grandfather had built this company on the principle that patient welfare came before profit, and Grant would honor that legacy. Violet appeared at his elbow, handing him a leather portfolio containing the latest trial data. Dr. Matthews from the research team is on standby if you need her to conference in, she said quietly. And your wife called while you were at the window. She mentioned something about dinner reservations at Lou Bernardine to celebrate Emma's science fair win. Grant nodded, grateful for Violet's careful attention to both his professional and personal life. She'd been with the company longer than he had, starting as his father's assistant before transitioning to Grant's office. Sometimes he wondered if she knew more about the company's inner workings than he did. Thanks, Violet. Hold my calls unless it's family or Dr. Matthews. He squared his shoulders and pushed open the heavy glass door, stepping into what he didn't yet know would be one of the last normal moments of his life. Thomas Wynn's booming voice greeted him first. Grant, my boy, we were just discussing the remarkable progress on the trials. Surely we're ready to move forward with FDA approval? The other board members turned to look at him, their expressions a carefully composed mixture of anticipation and professional interest. Grant settled into his chair at the head of the table, spreading out his documents with deliberate precision. Gentlemen, he began, let's look at the data before we discuss timelines. Dr. Matthews' team has some concerns about the long-term effects that I think we need to address. As he launched into his presentation, Grant couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the way Spencer Carr kept checking his phone under the table, or how Byron Sullivan wouldn't quite meet his eyes. But these were his father's friends, his mentors. If he couldn't trust them, who could he trust? The Manhattan skyline continued its daily light show behind them, unaware that it was witnessing the beginning of a story that would shake the foundations of everything Grant Lynch had built his life upon. The Hamptons mansion stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, its white columns and manicured lawns a testament to the American dream realized. Grant's Tesla purred to a stop in the circular driveway, the gravel crunching softly beneath its tires. He'd left the office earlier than usual, hoping to surprise his family and join in celebrating Emma's science fair victory. The autumn air carried the salt scent of the nearby ocean, mixed with the sweet fragrance of the late-blooming roses Christina meticulously maintained. The house lights were on, creating warm squares of gold against the growing darkness, but the usual sounds of family life, Emma's piano practice, Marcus's video games, or Christina's cooking show podcasts, were conspicuously absent. Grant collected his briefcase and jacket, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the limestone steps leading to the front door. The security panel blinked green as it recognized his fingerprint, a new feature of the system they'd installed 6 months ago after what they'd thought was a break-in attempt. He remembered Christina's insistence on the upgrade, her unusual interest in the cloud backup features that seemed excessive at the time. The foyer's marble floor reflected the crystal chandelier's light, creating patterns that danced across the family photos lining the walls. Grant loosened his tie, noting the stillness of the house. Usually, Chelsea, their household manager, would greet him with an update about the children's activities or any household matters requiring his attention. A voice drifted down from the second floor, Christina's voice, coming from his home office. Grant started to call out but stopped when he caught the edge in her tone. Something about it made him approach quietly, his years of boardroom negotiations having taught him the value of listening before revealing his presence. Dad, you don't understand. Christina's voice became clearer as he approached the partially open door. Grant is such a pathetic provider. Do you know what I've had to do to maintain this lifestyle? Grant's hand froze an inch from the doorknob, his breath catching in his throat. Through the gap, he could see Christina pacing, her Louboutin heels clicking against the hardwood floors. She was still wearing the cream St. John's suit she'd worn to Emma's science fair, but her usually perfect hair was disheveled as if she'd been running her hands through it in frustration. The house, the cars, even the kids' private school at Riverside Academy. It's all from my wild nights with the board members, she laughed, a harsh sound that bore no resemblance to the warm chuckle Grant had fallen in love with. Thank God he hasn't checked the new security system's cloud backup. The world tilted sideways. Grant's hand gripped the doorframe for support, his knuckles white with tension. The security system, the one installed after that convenient break-in that had somehow corrupted all the old system's footage. The same system Christina had researched extensively, insisting on specific features that had seemed excessive at the time. Chelsea's been helping me coordinate everything, Christina continued, dropping onto the leather sofa where Grant often read bedtime stories to Emma. She makes sure Emma and Marcus are with their grandparents when I need the house. Marshall's plan is working perfectly. Marshall. The name hit Grant like a physical blow. Marshall Gallagher, CEO of Gallagher Biotech, their biggest competitor and the man who'd been trying to acquire Lynch Pharmaceuticals with increasing aggression over the past year. Yes, Dad, I know what I'm doing. Christina's voice had taken on an edge of irritation. The board members are already compromised. Once they vote Grant out over the cancer drug project, the prenup becomes void. Marshall has guaranteed that I'll be taken care of. She paused, listening to whatever her father was saying. Of course I've thought about the children. Emma will be fine. She's young enough to adjust. And Marcus. She lowered her voice, but Grant could still hear every devastating word. Well, let's just say Grant's not the only one who's been living with illusions about family. The implied meaning of her words sent a chill through Grant's body. Marcus, the boy he'd raised as his own for 8 years, the child who called him Dad and came to him for help with math homework and advice about bullies. Was there more to the story of his parentage than Christina had told him? Chelsea has everything under control, Christina was saying. She's been documenting everything, just like Marshall asked. The board meeting today was just the beginning. Thomas and the others will start pushing harder about the cancer drug timeline. When Grant refuses to rush the trials, they'll have their excuse. The shareholders will accept that as grounds for removal. She walked to the window, her silhouette sharp against the gathering darkness outside. Marshall says the takeover will be clean and quick. Grant will never know what hit him until it's too late. The sound of footsteps on the stairs startled Grant. He stepped back silently, decades of tennis keeping his movements fluid and quiet. Chelsea appeared at the top of the stairs, her efficient manner somehow taking on a more sinister aspect in light of what he'd just heard. Mrs. Lynch? Chelsea called out. The children are back from their grandparents. Should I have Maria start dinner? Yes, thank you, Chelsea. Christina's voice had transformed, becoming once again the warm, loving tone Grant had known for 8 years. Dad, I have to go. The children are home. Yes, everything's under control. Love you too. Grant retreated to the foyer, his mind racing. He couldn't confront her and not yet. Not without proof. The security system's cloud backup that she'd mentioned. If what she said was true, it would have captured everything. But he needed to access it carefully, without alerting anyone that he was aware of their scheme. He heard Emma's voice floating in from the kitchen, followed by Marcus's laugh. His children? No, he corrected himself bitterly. His daughter and the boy he'd thought was his son. Were discussing the science fair victory, their voices full of the innocent excitement that now seemed to belong to another lifetime. Daddy, Emma's voice called out as she spotted him. Did Mom tell you? I won first place. Marcus helped me practice my presentation all week. Grant forced his features into a smile. Years of corporate negotiations finally serving a personal purpose. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Why don't you tell me all about it over dinner? As he hugged his daughter and ruffled Marcus's hair, a gesture that now caused his heart to clench. Grant's mind was already forming a plan. He needed to get to his office, access the security footage, and understand the full scope of the betrayal before he made his next move. I'm sorry, honey, he called out to Christina, who had appeared in the doorway. I just remembered some urgent papers I left at the office. Rain check on the celebration dinner? Of course, darling, Christina smiled, and Grant marveled at her performance. The children and I will have a quiet dinner, and we can celebrate properly this weekend, as he kissed her cheek. Fighting back the revulsion that threatened to overwhelm him, Grant caught a whiff of unfamiliar cologne. How many times had he dismissed such details, trusted blindly, believed in the perfect life he thought he'd built? Chelsea, he called out as he headed for the door, keeping his voice casual. Could you ask Jerry in IT to look at my office computer tomorrow? It's been running a bit slowly. Of course, Mr. Lynch, Chelsea replied smoothly. I'll call him first thing in the morning. Grant nodded, knowing she would report this to Christina, who would relay it to Marshall. Let them think he suspected nothing more than a slow computer. By tomorrow morning, he would have all the evidence he needed. The drive back to the city was a blur of thoughts and memories, each one taking on new meaning in light of what he'd discovered. The break-in that had conveniently destroyed the old security system. Chelsea's impeccable references and surprising knowledge of corporate operations. The board's increasingly aggressive stance on the cancer drug trials. As Manhattan's lights grew larger in his windshield, Grant's shock began to crystallize into something harder and colder. They had underestimated him, assumed he was too trusting, too focused on his perfect family to see the betrayal happening under his own roof. They would soon learn how wrong they were. Grant's fingerprint and retinal scan granted him access to the executive elevator, its soft hum accompanying his racing thoughts as it carried him to the top floor. The office was eerily quiet at this hour, the usual bustle of activity replaced by the gentle whir of climate control systems and the distant hum of servers. Grant's footsteps echoed through the empty corridors as he made his way to his private office, each step measured and purposeful. Violet's desk was dark, her computer screen black, but Grant knew her meticulous nature meant every file would be precisely where it needed to be. He accessed his private terminal, fingers flying across the keyboard as he pulled up the security company's portal. The system had been Christina's suggestion, InsightGuard, a seemingly reputable firm he now suspected might have connections to Gallagher Biotech. The cloud backup interface appeared on his screen, its cheerful blue layout masking its role in documenting his life's unraveling. Grant navigated to the earliest footage, dating back to the installation 6 months ago. He started with his home office, the scene of Christina's earlier conversation. The first recording made his blood run cold. Christina and Chelsea, the day after the system's installation, testing the camera's blind spots and audio sensitivity. Their technical knowledge seemed far too detailed for a housewife and household manager. Marshall wants to make sure every angle is covered, Chelsea was saying, her efficient manner now clearly that of a corporate operative rather than a house manager. The board members need to feel secure about their visits. Grant forced himself to keep watching, documenting times and dates as dozens of scenes played out before him. Thomas Wynne, arriving late in the evening, his silver hair disheveled, his usual corporate polish replaced by furtive glances. Byron Sullivan entering through the side door, Chelsea efficiently guiding him through the house's blind spots. Oliver Marks, whom Grant had always considered the most principled of the board members, looking torn but ultimately accepting an envelope from Christina in the garden. The timestamps painted a pattern of betrayal. Grant opened a secure document on his private server and began cataloging each incident, his legal training turning personal anguish into methodical evidence collection. The footage revealed an intricate dance of deception. Board meetings where members who had just left his house argued against his cancer drug timeline, private conversations about offshore accounts, and most damning of all, Christina's meetings with Marshall Gallagher himself. He found footage from 3 weeks ago. Marshall Gallagher sitting in Grant's own leather chair, his trademark arrogance evident even in the security footage. The board is almost ready, Christina was saying, perched on the desk in a way that made Grant's stomach turn. Once they vote him out over the mismanagement of the cancer drug project, the prenup becomes void. Excellent work, my dear. Marshall's voice oozed satisfaction. I always knew you had it in you. Just like old times, isn't it? The casual intimacy of their interaction suggested a history Grant hadn't known existed. He began a deeper search, pulling up everything he could find on Christina's past. His security clearance gave him access to corporate databases that painted a disturbing picture. Christina Pearson had once worked for a subsidiary of Gallagher Biotech, though her employment record seemed carefully scrubbed. A new window popped up on his screen, an alert from the building's security system. Someone else was accessing the footage. Grant quickly traced the login. Chelsea Trevino, using her household manager credentials to connect remotely. He watched as she downloaded specific clips, presumably preparing her own insurance file. The pieces were falling into place. Chelsea wasn't just helping Christina. She was documenting everything, creating a record that could protect her own interests. A quick background check revealed why. Chelsea Trevino had previously worked for Medicorp Solutions, a company that had been quietly acquired by Gallagher Biotech 3 years ago. Grant's phone buzzed. A text from Christina. Working late again? Don't forget Emma's piano recital tomorrow. Love you. Red Heart. The casual deception in those words made his hands shake as he typed a reply. Just finishing up. See you at home. He turned back to his computer, diving deeper into the financial records. The board member's sudden resistance to his careful approach to the cancer drug trials had seemed out of character. Now he knew why. Each push for acceleration, each argument for rushing to market, aligned perfectly with deposits to offshore accounts. The security footage continued to play silently on one of his screens. Spencer Carr meeting with an unknown man in the garden, Chelsea efficiently managing the rotation of visitors, Christina orchestrating it all with the skill of someone who had done this before. The cancer drug project, his father's legacy, the culmination of 15 years of research, was just collateral damage in their scheme. Grant's office phone lit up, Violet, calling at this unusual hour. He let it go to voicemail, then checked the message. Mr. Lynch, I noticed some unusual access patterns in our security systems. I've taken the liberty of backing up certain files to our secure server. Call me if you need anything. A small smile touched his lips. Violet's loyalty and efficiency had never wavered. He made a mental note to ensure she was protected from the fallout that was coming. As midnight approached, Grant had compiled enough evidence to destroy everyone involved. But looking at Marcus's photo on his desk, the boy's smile so trusting, so familiar. He knew he needed to be strategic. This wasn't just about corporate takeovers and betrayal anymore. There were children involved, lives that would be forever changed by what happened next. The night security guard, Mike, knocked gently on his door. Everything all right, Mr. Lynch? Been here a while. Just fine, Mike. Grant managed to smile. Finishing up some important work. The deeper Grant dug into the footage, the more he discovered about the break-in that had led to the new security system. The incident had occurred exactly 6 months ago, a supposedly random attempt that had conveniently damaged the old system storage unit. He found footage of Christina the next day, unusually insistent about the new system specifications. It has to be this model, she had told him. The cloud backup feature is essential for our family's safety. The emphasis on cloud storage now carried a completely different meaning. The Manhattan skyline had transformed from sunset gold to twinkling darkness outside his window. In the reflection of the glass, Grant barely recognized himself. The man who had left this office earlier today, secure in his perfect life, seemed like a stranger now. As the evidence mounted on his screen, each file more damning than the last, Grant felt the weight of every happy memory transform into a question. He saved one final copy of the security footage, his hands steady despite the turmoil in his mind. The family photo on his desk, Christina, Emma, Marcus, and himself, all smiling at last year's Christmas party, seemed to mock him with its artificial perfection. Mike, the night security guard, made his final rounds. Heading out soon, Mr. Lynch? Just finishing up, Mike, Grant managed, his voice surprisingly normal despite everything he discovered. After Mike left, Grant took one last look at the family photo before placing it face down in his briefcase. The time for illusions was over. The 72nd floor of the Morgan Stanley building housed some of New York's most prestigious law offices, including that of Alejandro Horn. The leather chairs in his corner office had witnessed countless corporate crises, but even Alejandro raised an eyebrow as he reviewed the evidence Grant had compiled over the past 3 days. "My God, Grant," Alejandro muttered, his usually impeccable Spanish accent thickening with concern as he studied the financial records spread across his mahogany desk. The depth of this conspiracy. It's unprecedented. Grant stood at the window, his reflection ghostly against the early morning Manhattan skyline. He'd barely slept since discovering Christina's betrayal, spending every moment building his case. "Can you trace the money?" Alejandro adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, gesturing to the team of forensic accountants working in the conference room next door. "Maria's team has been working around the clock. The offshore payments to the board members are sophisticated, but there's always a trail." He lifted a document, pointing to a highlighted section. "Look here." Each payment was routed through a series of shell companies, all ultimately leading back to subsidiaries of Gallagher Biotech. The accountant's leader, Maria Chun, entered with a fresh stack of documents. Her sleek black suit and precise movements spoke of someone who found truth in numbers. "Mr. Lynch, We've mapped the payment patterns. Each board member received deposits within 48 hours of their visits to your home. She cleared her throat delicately. The amounts escalated over time, suggesting increasing pressure or demands. Grant studied the financial timeline she presented. Thomas Wynne had been the first to fall, his initial payment coinciding with his sudden opposition to the cancer drug trials. Byron Sullivan followed 2 weeks later, then Oliver Marks. The amounts grew with each transaction, reaching into 7 figures. What about Chelsea Trevino? Grant asked, remembering the household manager's efficient orchestration of the betrayal. Maria pulled up another spreadsheet. Interesting pattern there. She's been skimming small amounts from the household accounts. Nothing that would raise immediate red flags. But she's also been methodically documenting everything. She pointed to a series of transactions. These suggest she's been keeping copies of all incriminating materials. It's a common insurance policy among corporate spies. Alejandro's phone bust. The board members have arrived for the emergency meeting. He studied Grant's face carefully. Are you sure you want to do this now? We could take more time to build the case. Grant straightened his tie. A different one from the day he discovered the truth, as if even his wardrobe needed to distance itself from the life that had been a lie. No. Every day we wait is another day they're working against the company. Against my father's legacy. The walk to conference room A felt like a journey through time. Grant passed photographs of past corporate triumphs, each one now tainted by questions of what else he might have missed. The board members were already seated. Thomas Wynne absently stirring his coffee, Byron Sullivan reviewing documents with forced concentration, Oliver Marks staring out the window, and Spencer Carr typing on his phone with unusual intensity. Alejandro entered first, followed by Maria and 2 other accountants pushing carts loaded with evidence binders. Grant took his place at the head of the table, noting how Thomas's hand trembled slightly as he set down his coffee cup. Gentlemen, Grant began. His voice steady despite the rage and disappointment churning beneath his professional demeanor. I've called this emergency meeting to discuss the real reason behind your resistance to the cancer drug timeline. Spencer Carr's head snapped up from his phone. I'm not sure I understand the implications of that statement, Grant. Instead of responding, Grant nodded to Maria, who activated the room's presentation system. The first image that appeared on the screen was a security camera still of Thomas Wynne entering Grant's home at 11:43 p.m. on a Tuesday night, followed by bank records showing a payment of $500,000 to his Cayman Islands account 2 days later. The color drained from Thomas's face. Byron Sullivan quickly shuffled his papers into his briefcase, as if preparing for a hasty exit. Oliver Marks closed his eyes, his shoulders sagging with what looked like relief. We have 6 months of security footage, Grant continued, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. 6 months of late-night visits, offshore payments, and conversations about delaying the cancer drug to weaken the company's position. 6 months of you betraying not just me, but every patient waiting for this treatment. Thomas Wynne found his voice first, though it quavered. Grant, my boy, you have to understand. The pressures we were under. Save it. Grant's tone could have frozen hydrogen. Maria, please show them the financial records. The next hour was a methodical dismantling of their deception. Maria and her team presented document after document, tracing every payment, every meeting, every betrayal. The board members' reactions told their own stories. Thomas Wynne and Byron Sullivan seemed to shrink in their chairs, the fight draining from them as their sophisticated financial schemes were laid bare. Oliver Marks maintained a stoic facade, but his hands gripped his armrests with white-knuckled intensity. Spencer Carr's eyes darted between the evidence and his phone, his calculating expression suggesting he was already planning his next move. The choice is simple. Alejandro took over, his legal training evident in his precise tone. You can resign quietly, accept basic severance packages, and sign cooperation agreements, or we can pursue criminal charges for corporate espionage and breach of fiduciary duty. The evidence we've compiled would make for a fascinating trial. He smiled thinly. I'm sure the press would love it. Grant watched their faces as the reality of their situation sank in. These men had been his father's friends, his mentors. They'd stood beside him at his father's funeral, offered guidance during his early days as CEO. Now they sat before him as criminals, their distinguished careers about to end in disgrace. How long do we have to decide? Byron Sullivan asked, his legal training asserting itself even in crisis. Until noon, Grant replied. I suggest you use the time wisely. As the board members filed out, Grant noticed Spencer Carr attempt to make a call, only to frown at his phone in confusion. The company's IT department, following quiet orders given days ago, had already begun blocking their external communications. The morning stretched on, each minute marked by the steady accumulation of resignation letters and signed agreements. Thomas Wynne was the first to capitulate, his hands shaking as he signed the documents. Byron Sullivan followed after a brief consultation with his personal attorney. Oliver Marks signed without a word, meeting Grant's eyes for a moment with what seemed like apologetic relief. Only Spencer Carr held out, his attempts to contact Marshall Gallagher growing increasingly frustrated as each call failed to connect. The IT department's firewall was performing its job perfectly, isolating him from his co-conspirators. As noon approached, Grant stood again at his office window, watching the city below continue its normal rhythm, unaware of the corporate drama unfolding above. The cancer drug project, his father's dream, the work of countless dedicated scientists, would now proceed without interference. But the victory felt hollow against the weight of the personal betrayals still to be addressed. Maria appeared at his door. Mr. Lynch? All 3 resignation letters are processed. Spencer Carr is still refusing to sign, but his access to company systems has been revoked. Grant nodded, his reflection in the window looking older than it had just days ago. Thank you, Maria. Please have security escort him from the building. The morning's confrontation had been necessary, but it was only the first step. As Grant gathered his things to head home, he knew the hardest confrontation still lay ahead. The board's betrayal had been professional, motivated by greed. But what waited for him at home was personal, a betrayal that had infected every moment of his family life for the past 8 years. His phone buzzed with a text from Christina. Heard about the board meeting. Are you okay? Should I have dinner ready early? Grant stared at the message, marveling at her ability to maintain the facade even now. He didn't reply. Instead, he opened his briefcase and removed a stack of papers, divorce documents Alejandro had prepared, along with evidence of every betrayal she thought was safely hidden in the cloud. The sun had reached its zenith over Manhattan, marking noon. In office buildings across the city, people were heading out for lunch, making plans, living their normal lives. But for Grant Lynch, normalcy had ended the moment he'd heard his wife's voice through that partially open door. Now it was time to bring her carefully constructed world of lies crashing down around her. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Christina's favorite Bergdorf Goodman private shopping suite, the rows of designer handbags, Hermes, Chanel, Louis Vuitton, each one purchased with Marshall Gallagher's money. The sales associate, Monica, who had fawned over Christina for years, watched in confusion as Grant systematically identified each bag his wife had bought in the past 6 months. Mr. Lynch? Monica's professional smile wavered as Grant pointed to a crocodile Birkin. Is everything all right? Perfect, Grant replied, his tone pleasantly businesslike. I'll take all of these. Could you have them delivered to this address? He handed her Edgar Pearson's business card, enjoying the irony of sending Christina's ill-gotten gains to her father's doorstep. While Monica processed the delivery, Grant composed the note that would accompany the bags. Shame on you for supporting your daughter's affairs. I'm divorcing her. Short, direct, and guaranteed to hit both Christina and her father where it would hurt most, their carefully maintained social facade. His phone had been buzzing steadily all morning. News of the board members' mass resignation had sent shockwaves through New York's corporate circles. Christina's messages had grown increasingly frantic. Grant, what's happening at the office? Call me. The children are worried. Please come home. Why aren't you answering my calls? He left them all unread. Let her anxiety build. Let her wonder if her carefully constructed scheme was unraveling. The security cameras he'd accessed would show her his methodical dismantling of her designer collection, his visit to their private banker, his meeting with the children's school administrators. As he left Bergdorf's, his driver, James, newly vetted and confirmed loyal, held the car door open. The household staff has been dismissed, sir, except for Mrs. Trevino. She insisted on remaining to speak with you. Grant checked his watch. Right on schedule. Chelsea Trevino, the efficient household manager who had orchestrated so much of Christina's deception, would be realizing that her position was compromised. Her pattern of embezzlement from the household accounts, while clever, had left its own trail. The question was, would she run, or would she try to bargain? The familiar drive to their Hamptons mansion felt surreal. The manicured lawns and elegant facades of their neighbors' homes seemed to mock the corruption that had festered behind his own perfect exterior. As they approached the house, Grant noticed Chelsea's car still in the circular driveway. She was waiting on the front steps, her usual clipboard replaced by a thick manila envelope. Mr. Lynch, Chelsea's professional demeanor remained intact, though her knuckles were white where they gripped the envelope. I believe we need to talk. Grant gestured to the front door. After you, Mrs. Trevino. They settled in his home office, the very room where he'd first overheard Christina's betrayal. Chelsea sat rigidly in one of the leather chairs, the envelope placed carefully on her lap. I assume you've discovered everything, she began, her voice steady despite the circumstances. About my role in Mrs. Lynch's arrangements, the documentation I've kept, the financial discrepancies. Grant leaned back in his chair, studying the woman who had managed his household while helping to destroy it. The question is, Mrs. Trevino, what do you plan to do with that information? Chelsea reached into her bag and withdrew a thick folder. Mr. Lynch, before we discuss my situation, you should see this. She spread out dozens of meticulously labeled documents across his desk, meeting notes, photographs, transcribed conversations, and financial records, all cataloged with the precision of a professional archivist. I've documented everything Marshall Gallagher has done, every instruction, every meeting, every payment. It's what kept me safe. Her composure cracked slightly. Mr. Lynch, there's something you need to understand. Marshall Gallagher. He didn't just offer me money. She opened the envelope, removing a stack of medical bills. My daughter, Sophie, she needed specialized treatment. Treatment our insurance wouldn't cover. Marshall found out somehow. He offered to pay for everything, but the price was my cooperation. Grant examined the bills, hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical expenses for a teenage girl's rare condition. And the embezzlement? Insurance, Chelsea admitted. I documented everything. Every meeting, every phone call, every instruction Marshall gave, including his original approach to Mrs. Lynch. She placed a USB drive on his desk. It's all here, including recordings of conversations you won't find on your security system. A knock at the door interrupted them. James appeared, his expression grave. Sir, Mr. Pearson is on his way. He seems agitated. Edgar Pearson, Christina's father, the man who had listened to his daughter disparage her marriage just days ago. Grant checked his watch. The designer bags would have arrived at Edgar's office by now. Mrs. Trevino, Grant turned back to Chelsea. We'll continue this conversation later. I suggest you make copies of everything you have. You may need them. As Chelsea gathered her things, she paused at the door. Mr. Lynch? For what it's worth. I'm sorry. Not just for my part in this, but for what it's done to the children. Emma and Marcus. They don't deserve any of this. The mention of Marcus, the boy he'd raised as his son, sent a fresh wave of pain through Grant's chest. He dismissed Chelsea with a nod, unable to trust his voice. Alone in his office, Grant reviewed the day's events. The board members' resignations would be public knowledge by now, sending ripples through the corporate world. Spencer Carr had grown increasingly desperate throughout the day, his every attempt to contact Marshall Gallagher thwarted by the IT department's sophisticated firewall. His calls, emails, and even attempts to use his personal devices had all failed, buying crucial time as the other board members resigned. The delivery of Christina's designer bags to her father's office would force both of them to confront the end of their deception. His phone buzzed again. Edgar Pearson. Wait, Grant. There's something you don't know about your wife's past. Something that explains everything. Grant stared at the message, his finger hovering over the delete button. After everything he discovered, what possible explanation could justify 8 years of lies? But something in Edgar's desperate tone gave him pause. Perhaps it was time to understand the full scope of the deception that had shaped his life for the past 8 years. He typed a brief reply. Alejandro's office. 1 hour. Grant gathered the documents he'd need for the meeting. The day's events had systematically dismantled the professional side of the conspiracy. Now it was time to unravel the personal betrayals that had turned his family life into an elaborate fiction. The designer bags delivered to Edgar's office were just the opening salvo. By tomorrow, Christina's carefully constructed world would lie in ruins. But first, Grant needed to hear whatever desperate explanation her father thought could possibly justify 8 years of calculated deception. Alejandro's office felt different in the evening light, the Manhattan skyline a glittering backdrop to what would prove to be the most difficult conversation of Grant's life. Edgar Pearson sat across from him, looking every bit the successful corporate lawyer he was, except for the slight tremor in his hands as he placed a worn leather briefcase on the mahogany desk. "Thank you for meeting me, Grant," Edgar began, his usual commanding presence diminished by what appeared to be genuine distress. "I know after what you've discovered, especially about the board and the designer bags." He winced at the reminder of Grant's dramatic message delivery. "Skip the pleasantries, Edgar." Grant's voice was cold. "You said there was something I needed to know about Christina's past. Something that explains 8 years of lies?" Edgar ran a hand through his silver hair, a gesture so similar to one of Marcus's that it made Grant's chest tighten. "It starts before you met her. When Christina was first starting her career at Carlton Fisher Securities, the firm that was acquired by Gallagher Biotech, Grant supplied, pieces beginning to click into place." "Yes." Edgar opened his briefcase, removing a file that looked well-handled. "What you don't know is that Marshall Gallagher wasn't just her boss. He was her mentor, her lover." The last word seemed to pain him physically. Grant's hands clenched under the desk, but his face remained impassive. "Go on." "Christina was brilliant, top of her class at Wharton, offers from every major firm. Marshall recognized her potential immediately. Took her under his wing." Edgar's voice grew hoarse. "She was 24, impressionable, ambitious. He was 40, powerful, married. It was a disaster waiting to happen." Edgar pulled out a series of photographs. A younger Christina at corporate events, always standing slightly too close to Marshall Gallagher. The progression was clear, from mentorship to something more intimate. When she became pregnant with Marcus, Edgar continued, each word seeming to cause him physical pain, Marshall showed his true colors. He was ruthless. Used his influence to force her to give up custody rights to the child's biological father, a junior executive who had no idea about Christina's relationship with Marshall. Grant studied one of the photos, noting how young and vulnerable Christina looked despite her professional smile. "And you knew about all of this?" "Not then." Edgar shook his head, pulling out more documents. "I discovered the truth 3 years ago. Found some old papers in Christina's childhood home while helping her mother downsize. Started digging. What I found." He spread out a series of legal documents across the desk. The paperwork told a devastating story. Custody agreements signed under duress, NDAs with punitive clauses, financial arrangements designed to ensure silence. Marshall Gallagher's signature appeared on page after page, each document another link in a chain of control. "When she met you," Edgar's voice softened, "it was supposed to be an assignment. Marshall wanted inside information about Lynch Pharmaceuticals. But something changed. She fell in love with you." "Genuinely fell in love?" Grant remembered their first meeting, a charity gala where Christina had spilled her champagne on his tuxedo. It had seemed charmingly accidental at the time. Now he wondered if even that had been choreographed. When Marshall found out her feelings were real, Edgar continued, he threatened to reveal everything. Not just Marcus's true parentage, but evidence he'd manufactured suggesting corporate espionage on her part. "It would have destroyed both your careers, your reputations." Edgar reached into his briefcase one final time, removing a USB drive. "This contains everything. Marshall's blackmail, the custody agreements, recorded conversations. I've been gathering evidence since I discovered the truth, trying to find a way to protect both of you without destroying Marcus's life." Grant stared at the small device that contained yet another layer of his life's unraveling. Why didn't you come to me sooner? Edgar's shoulders slumped. I was a coward, afraid of what it would do to my daughter, to Marcus, to you. I thought I could find a way to handle Marshall myself, use my legal connections. But he was always one step ahead. That conversation I overheard, Grant said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. When Christina was calling you, complaining about me as a provider, she knew the house was under surveillance, Edgar explained. Marshall had demanded proof that she was maintaining her cover, keeping you unsuspecting. Those conversations were performances, scripted, recorded, sent to him as evidence of her compliance. The sun had set completely now, leaving Manhattan's lights to twinkle like cold stars through Alejandro's office windows. Grant stood, walking to the glass, his reflection overlaying the city below. She tried to protect everyone, Edgar said quietly. You, Marcus, her career, her freedom. She thought she could handle it, keep all the plates spinning. But Marshall kept demanding more. The board members, the cancer drug delays, everything. Grant turned back to his father-in-law, studying the man who had carried this knowledge for 3 years. The evidence you've gathered, how comprehensive is it? Everything's here. Edgar patted the USB drive. Dates, times, recordings, documents. Enough to prove Marshall's manipulation and coercion. Not enough to completely exonerate Christina, but enough to show she wasn't acting entirely of her own free will. Grant picked up the USB drive, its weight insignificant compared to the burden of truth it contained. The story Edgar had revealed filled in the gaps, provided context for the betrayal he'd discovered. But it didn't erase the 8 years of lies, the manipulation of his board, the deliberate sabotage of his company's life-saving research. Thank you for telling me this, Grant said finally, his voice carefully neutral. It doesn't change what has to happen next, but it helps me understand. Edgar stood, gathering his documents with trembling hands. She loves you, Grant. Whatever else she's done, whatever lies she's told, that part was real. As Edgar left, Grant remained in Alejandro's office, surrounded by the evidence of a deception far deeper and more complex than he'd imagined. The Manhattan skyline continued its nightly display, indifferent to the human drama playing out behind its gleaming windows. The day had begun with a confrontation of professional betrayal, the board members' resignation, their schemes exposed. It was ending with the revelation of a personal tragedy that spanned decades, reaching back before he'd even met Christina. His phone buzzed. Another message from Christina. Please come home. We need to talk. I can explain everything. Grant stared at the message, then at the USB drive in his hand. The truth that had emerged was far more complex than the simple betrayal he'd first discovered. 3 decades of manipulation, coercion, and fear had led to this moment. His phone buzzed again with another message from Christina, but Grant set it aside. He had all the pieces now. Chelsea's meticulous records of Marshall's operations, the board's financial trails, and Edgar's evidence of past manipulations. The truth was finally complete, even if it offered no comfort. The 43rd floor of the federal building hummed with quiet intensity as FBI agent Desiree Carver spread documents across her desk. Her dark blazer and practical shoes spoke of a woman who prioritized efficiency over fashion, while the lines around her eyes hinted at years spent pursuing complex financial crimes. This is extraordinary, she murmured, examining the USB drive Edgar had provided. We've been building a case against Marshall Gallagher for 3 years, but could never get enough concrete evidence. She looked up at Grant and Alejandro. The custody agreements alone show a pattern of blackmail and coercion. Alejandro leaned forward, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the fluorescent light. Chelsea Trevino's records are even more comprehensive. Show her, Grant. Grant nodded to his driver, James, who brought in 3 boxes of meticulously organized files. Chelsea's insurance policy against Marshall. Agent Carver's eyes widened as she began examining the contents. Bank transfers, meeting minutes, recorded conversations. She held up a particularly detailed spreadsheet. She documented everything. Dates, times, participants, even the exact amounts of money changing hands. A slight smile crossed her face. This is exactly what we needed. The wall behind her desk was covered with photographs and documents, a 3-year investigation into Marshall Gallagher's corporate espionage activities. Grant recognized several of his competitors who had mysteriously failed or been forced into disadvantageous mergers. Mrs. Trevino's cooperation would be invaluable, Agent Carver continued, already organizing the new evidence into her existing case files. But she'll need protection. Gallagher has a history of making problems disappear. I've already arranged for that, Grant replied, thinking of the arrangements he'd made over the past week. Her daughter's medical care has been transferred to a private facility under an assumed name. They're both being relocated to a secure location. Chelsea herself sat in the adjacent conference room, her usual efficient demeanor somewhat subdued. Through the glass walls, Grant could see her methodically reviewing documents with another FBI agent, pointing out connections and explaining timelines. There's something else you should see, Agent Carver said, pulling up a file on her computer. We've been tracking Marshall's pattern of delaying competing drug developments. Your cancer treatment wasn't the first. She showed them a chart of suspicious delays and failed trials across multiple pharmaceutical companies. He's been systematically suppressing medical breakthroughs that could threaten his market position. Grant's jaw tightened. How many patients had suffered because of Marshall's greed? How many lives could have been saved if these treatments had reached the market on schedule? What about Marcus? He asked, the question that had been weighing on him since Edgar's revelations. The custody situation complicates things. Agent Carver nodded sympathetically. We'll need to handle that aspect carefully. The evidence suggests Marshall used the child's custody as a control mechanism from the beginning. It's part of his pattern of leverage. Grant stood, walking to the window that overlooked the city. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably doing his homework, unaware that his entire world was about to change. Again, I've made some decisions about that, Grant said quietly. I've instructed my lawyers to set up a trust fund for his education and future needs. He shouldn't suffer for the actions of others. Alejandro raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? Given the circumstances, he's a child. Grant cut him off. Whatever Christina and Marshall did, Marcus is innocent. I've been his father in every way that matters for 8 years. I won't be that anymore, but I can ensure he's taken care of. Agent Carver made some notes in her file. We'll need to interview him eventually, very carefully, with proper support. His perspective on Marshall's visits and interactions could be valuable. A knock at the door interrupted them. Another agent entered with a tablet displaying surveillance photos. We've confirmed Gallagher's plans to attend the Healthcare Innovation Conference next week. He's booked the penthouse suite at the Four Seasons. Agent Carver's expression sharpened. Perfect. That's our opportunity. She turned to Chelsea, who had just finished her initial interview. Mrs. Trevino, would you be willing to help us set a trap? Chelsea straightened in her chair, her professional mask settling back into place. What exactly would that entail? Over the next hour, they crafted a careful strategy. Chelsea would contact Marshall, claiming to have important information about Grant's next moves. The conference would provide the perfect cover for a meeting. We'll wire the suite, Agent Carver explained, showing them the technical specifications. Every word will be recorded. Mrs. Trevino, you'll wear a backup recording device. But your main job is to get him talking about the overall scheme. Chelsea nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. He trusts me, or at least, he thinks he owns me because of my daughter's medical bills. He won't suspect anything. Grant watched as the FBI team transformed Chelsea's meticulous records into an organized case. Her documented conversations, combined with Edgar's historical evidence and the financial trails Alejandro had uncovered, painted a damning picture of corporate corruption spanning decades. There's one more thing, Agent Carver said as they were wrapping up. We'll need to coordinate with your IT department. When we move on Marshall, we'll want to simultaneously secure all digital evidence at Gallagher Biotech. One wrong keystroke could wipe out years of records. I'll have our team standing by, Grant assured her. They've already proven their effectiveness by blocking Spencer Carr's communications. As they left the federal building, Grant felt a complex mixture of emotions. The machinery of justice was in motion, but the human cost would be enormous. Emma would lose her mother to prison. Marcus would learn the truth about his parentage and lose another father figure. Careers would be destroyed, reputations shattered. Grant, Alejandro caught his arm as they reached the car. Are you absolutely sure about the trust fund for Marcus? No one would blame you if— I would blame me, Grant replied simply. What's the point of stopping Marshall if we lose our humanity in the process? The drive back to his office was quiet, each man lost in his thoughts. The sun was setting over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades that reminded Grant of the day he'd first discovered Christina's betrayal. So much had changed since then, and so much was still to come. In his office, Grant found a new message from Christina. The children miss you. Please, can we talk? I know you've learned the truth from my father. Let me explain in person. He deleted the message without replying. The time for explanations was past. Now it was time for justice, not just for him, but for every patient whose treatment had been delayed, every company that had been destroyed, every life Marshall Gallagher had corrupted in his pursuit of power. Chelsea's evidence had opened the door. The FBI had the leverage they needed. Soon, Marshall Gallagher would learn that his carefully constructed web of manipulation had finally ensnared its creator. The Healthcare Innovation Conference had transformed the Four Seasons Grand Ballroom into a showcase of medical advancement. Pharmaceutical companies from around the world displayed their latest breakthroughs, while executives in expensive suits networked over champagne and carefully crafted canapes. Marshall Gallagher moved through the crowd like a shark through calm waters, his silver hair and tailored Tom Ford suit marking him as corporate royalty. At 62, he carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to wielding power. He smiled, shook hands, and made small talk, completely unaware that every movement was being monitored by FBI agents dispersed throughout the hotel. In the security command center they'd established 2 floors below, Agent Carver watched the surveillance feeds. Target is approaching the elevators, she spoke quietly into her comm unit. Mrs. Trevino, are you in position? In the penthouse suite, Chelsea Trevino adjusted her silk blouse, careful not to disturb the sophisticated recording equipment hidden beneath. Yes, she replied, her voice steady despite her nerves. Everything's ready. The suite had been carefully prepared. Microcameras concealed in light fixtures, and air vents would capture every angle. Parabolic microphones hidden in the walls would record every word. A team of technical experts had spent the previous night ensuring complete coverage. Remember, Agent Carver's voice came through Chelsea's earpiece. Let him do most of the talking. Guide the conversation to his overall scheme, but don't push too hard. We need him to volunteer the information. The elevator's soft chime announced Marshall's arrival. Chelsea took her position by the window, adopting the slightly anxious posture of someone with urgent news to share. Chelsea, my dear, Marshall's voice was warm with false affection as he entered the suite. This must be important for you to insist on meeting here rather than the office. Chelsea turned, wringing her hands in a show of distress. Mr. Gallagher, thank you for coming. I'm worried about Grant Lynch's next moves. He's been asking questions, accessing old security footage. Marshall's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in his eyes. He poured himself a drink from the suite's bar, his movements deliberately casual. Tell me everything. In the command center, Agent Carver leaned forward as Chelsea began leading Marshall through his own web of deceit. The household manager's years of training in keeping detailed records now served her well as she recalled specific dates and events, using them to draw out Marshall's explanations. It was a brilliant plan, wasn't it? Marshall settled into an armchair, swirling his scotch, using Christina's pregnancy with Marcus to ensure her cooperation. The custody agreement gave us the perfect leverage. Chelsea nodded, her expression carefully concerned. But now that Grant knows about Marcus's true parentage, he knows. Marshall's composure slipped slightly. How much? Edgar Pearson apparently told him everything. Chelsea watched Marshall's reaction carefully. About your history with Christina, how you forced her to give up custody rights to Marcus's biological father. Marshall's laugh was harsh. Edgar finally grew a spine. Did he? No matter. The plan was already in motion long before Christina met Grant Lynch. Taking over Lynch Pharmaceuticals was just the latest step. The board members were surprisingly easy to compromise. Chelsea ventured, following the FBI's scripted prompts. Money and sex. The two oldest motivators in history. Marshall's arrogance was palpable. Christina played her part perfectly, though I admit I hadn't anticipated her actually falling in love with Lynch. It could have ruined everything if I hadn't had Marcus's custody to hold over her. In the command center, Agent Carver signaled her team to ready themselves. Marshall was building up to the admissions they needed. Of course, delaying their cancer drug research was crucial, Marshall continued, warming to his subject. Can't have Lynch Pharmaceuticals releasing a breakthrough treatment when Gallagher Biotech's competing product is still 2 years from market. He smiled coldly. It's a strategy that's served me well over the years. Buy the competition, suppress their research, maintain market dominance. Like you did with Medicorp? Chelsea prompted, remembering the FBI's briefing. And Carlton Fisher? Exactly. Marshall stood, moving to the window to survey the city below. This is how you build an empire, Chelsea. Sometimes promising treatments have to be delayed, companies have to fail, people have to be persuaded to cooperate. The weak are devoured by the strong. It's the natural order of things. And the patients whose treatments were delayed? Chelsea's voice held a hint of genuine emotion, thinking of her own daughter. Marshall waved a dismissive hand. Collateral damage. Business is business. Your daughter's medical bills made you an ideal addition to our team, by the way. Nothing motivates quite like a sick child. In the command center, Agent Carver nodded in satisfaction. We've got him. Move in. The suite's door burst open, FBI agents flooding in with weapons drawn. Marshall's drink crashed to the floor as he spun around, his face transforming from confusion to rage as he realized what had happened. Marshall Gallagher, Agent Carver strode into the suite, holding up her badge. You're under arrest for corporate espionage, blackmail, fraud, and conspiracy to suppress medical research. You have the right to remain silent. As agents handcuffed Marshall, his mask of corporate sophistication crumbled. Chelsea, he snarled. You stupid bitch. Do you have any idea what you've done? Chelsea stood straighter, removing her recording equipment with steady hands. Yes, Mr. Gallagher. I've done exactly what you taught me to do. Kept careful records and used them when they would benefit me most. Through the suite's windows, the New York skyline sparkled indifferently, witness to another drama in the endless dance of power and betrayal. In offices across the city, FBI teams were simultaneously raiding Gallagher Biotech, securing evidence before it could be destroyed. Marshall Gallagher, who had built an empire on others' destruction, was led away in handcuffs, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. The trap had sprung perfectly, years of corruption and manipulation finally exposed to the light of justice. The morning headlines screamed across every major newspaper and financial website. Pharmaceutical titan arrested. Marshall Gallagher charged in massive corporate espionage scheme. Additional revelations had emerged about Spencer Carr's long-standing connection to Marshall. Financial records showing their collaboration predated Christina's involvement by nearly a decade, suggesting a deeper conspiracy than initially suspected. Grant watched the coverage from his office, the headlines confirming what Agent Carver had told him late last night. The operation had been a complete success. Marshall's admissions in the hotel suite, combined with Chelsea's records and the evidence seized from Gallagher Biotech, had created an airtight case. Violet appeared at his door, her efficiency undiminished by the chaos of recent events. Sir, Spencer Carr's wife is holding on line 2. Apparently, he's seeking a plea deal in exchange for additional information about Marshall's earlier operations, specifically their work together in suppressing competing research since 2005. Have her call Alejandro directly, Grant replied, turning back to the window. The same Manhattan skyline that had witnessed his world unraveling now watched its gradual reconstruction. His intercom buzzed again. Mr. Lynch? Agent Carver is here with your wife. Grant took a deep breath. Send them in. Christina entered first, her designer outfit unable to hide the strain of recent events. Agent Carver followed, carrying a thick folder of documents. The U.S. Attorney's Office is offering a deal, Agent Carver began without preamble. In exchange for her full cooperation and testimony against Marshall, they're recommending a reduced sentence of 3 years, with possibility of early release for good behavior. Given the extent of Marshall's coercion and her assistance in building the case, the prosecutors feel this is appropriate. Grant studied Christina, noting how her usual poise had crumbled. She met his gaze briefly before looking away. I thought I could protect everyone. Christina's voice was barely above a whisper. Marcus, my father. I was wrong, and I destroyed everything instead. The evidence suggests significant coercion. Agent Carver continued professionally. The custody agreements, Marshall's threats, the documented pattern of blackmail. While it doesn't excuse your actions, it does provide context the prosecutors are willing to consider. Grant moved to his desk, removing a file he'd prepared. I've made some decisions regarding Marcus. He handed the documents to Christina. This establishes a trust fund for his education and future needs. It's irrevocable, regardless of what happens next. I've also been in contact with David Chun, his biological father. He's a senior executive at Morgan Stanley now, and he's agreed to a gradual transition plan that puts Marcus's emotional well-being first. Tears welled in Christina's eyes as she read the papers. You don't have to do this. After everything, I'm not doing it for you. Grant's voice was firm but not unkind. Marcus is innocent in all this. He shouldn't suffer for the actions of others. Agent Carver cleared her throat. We've located Marcus's biological father. He's been informed of the situation and is willing to work towards a gradual transition of custody. The weight of years of deception hung heavy in the room. Grant thought of the boy who called him Dad, who shared his love of baseball and came to him with nightmares. The trust fund was the last act of fatherhood he could offer. The disease didn't care about any of this, Grant said quietly. While Marshall was playing his games, delaying research, people were dying. Real people with families who loved them, who might have been saved by treatments he suppressed. Christina's shoulders slumped. I know, when I realized the full scope of what he was doing, but by then, I was in too deep. He had everything. The custody agreements, evidence of my early work for him, details that could destroy both our careers. Mrs. Lynch, Agent Carver interjected. We need to discuss your formal statement. The prosecutors want to move quickly. As they prepared to leave, Christina paused at the door. What about Emma? We'll arrange supervised visits once you're... Grant couldn't bring himself to say in prison, once things are settled. She needs her mother, but it has to be carefully managed. After they left, Grant sat in his office, watching the sun trace its familiar path across the sky. A year of transformations lay ahead, personal, professional, and emotional. 1 year later, the same Manhattan skyline painted a different picture. Grant stood at his familiar window, but the view had changed. Below, construction crews were adding the finishing touches to the new Lynch Pharmaceuticals Research Center, its modern glass facade reflecting the evening light. The cancer drug was finally in production, already saving lives. The latest trial results showed even better outcomes than they'd initially hoped. On his desk, thank you letters from patients and their families provided daily reminders of why the fight had been worth it. The company's transformation extended beyond its research success. New board members Amanda Schmidt and Derek Whitehead had brought fresh perspectives and ethical leadership. Their first act had been to establish a patient-first policy that prioritized medical breakthroughs over profit margins. His intercom buzzed. The new assistant's voice was cheerful but professional. Mr. Lynch? Emma's practice is finishing up. Molly says they'll be home in 20 minutes. Grant smiled, thinking of his daughter's newfound passion for piano. At 8, Emma was thriving in her new routine, though the changes hadn't been easy. Her weekly supervised visits with Christina were emotional but healing, allowing them to build a new kind of relationship within careful boundaries. Molly Levy, their new nanny, had been thoroughly vetted by both the FBI and his security team. Her references were real, her background pristine. More importantly, she brought a warmth and stability that helped Emma navigate the drastic changes in her life. The trust fund for Marcus was securely established, managed by independent trustees to ensure its proper use for education and future needs. Though Grant couldn't continue as his father figure, the betrayal had cut too deep. He ensured the boy would have every opportunity for a good life. Recent reports indicated Marcus was adjusting well to life with his biological father, a development that brought Grant a complex mixture of relief and sadness. His phone buzzed with a message from Agent Carver. Final sentencing today. Marshall got 25 years. Spencer Carr's cooperation earned him 5. Thought you'd want to know. Justice had been served, but Grant found no joy in it. The whole affair had taught him about the true nature of strength, not in revenge or retribution, but in maintaining one's humanity even in the face of betrayal. He gathered his briefcase, ready to head home where Emma and Molly waited. The family photos on his desk had changed. Now they showed just him and Emma at her piano recital, on their weekend adventures, building their new life together. These moments, honest and unscripted, had become his true wealth. The elevator ride down gave him time to reflect on the transformation of the past year. He had lost a wife and a stepson, but gained something more valuable: wisdom, strength, and the understanding that sometimes life's greatest betrayals lead to its most important lessons. The security guard nodded as Grant passed through the lobby. "Good evening, Mr. Lynch. Beautiful sunset tonight." "Yes, it is, Mike," Grant replied, stepping into the warm evening air. The same sun that had witnessed his world shattering now blessed its reconstruction. Ahead lay home, where Emma's piano practice would fill the rooms with music, where dinner conversations would be genuine, where truth had replaced pretense. He had survived the fall from perfect heights and emerged stronger, wiser, and somehow more whole. The perfect life he'd thought he had was gone, but in its place was something real, a life built on truth, strengthened by adversity, and illuminated by the pure love of a father for his daughter. As his car pulled away from the curb, Grant looked back at the Lynch Pharmaceuticals building one last time. The company's logo, the double helix his grandfather had chosen, still turned slowly against the darkening sky, a reminder that even in the world of corporate power plays and betrayal, the fundamental mission remained unchanged: to help, to heal, to make the world a little better than they found it. That, at least, was a truth worth holding on to. Epilogue. 5 years later. The Manhattan skyline had evolved in the half-decade since Marshall Gallagher's empire crumbled, but some things remained constant. Grant Lynch still began each morning at his corner office window, though now the view included the sprawling Lynch Pharmaceuticals research campus that stretched along the East River. At 47, the silver in Grant's hair had multiplied, but success and inner peace had softened the hard lines that betrayal had once etched into his face. The morning sun glinted off the awards lining his office walls, recognition not just for corporate success, but for the lives changed by the cancer treatment that had finally reached those who needed it. "Mr. Lynch?" The intercom carried his new assistant's voice. "Dr. Matthews is here with the latest trial results, and you have that video call with Emma in 30 minutes. Grant smiled at the mention of his daughter. Now 12, Emma was spending her first semester at the prestigious International School of Geneva, her inherited intelligence and acquired resilience making her an exceptional student. Their daily video calls were the highlight of his day, though the 7-hour time difference meant careful scheduling. His phone buzzed with a news alert, another kind of reminder of the past. Marshall Gallagher denied parole for third time. Former pharmaceutical CEO continues to serve 25-year sentence for corporate espionage. The article detailed Marshall's latest failed attempt at early release. At 67, the once powerful CEO had aged dramatically in federal prison. His testimony against other corporate conspirators had earned him no favors. The discovery that his suppression of medical research had led to quantifiable deaths had hardened both judges and parole boards against him. Grant opened his laptop to review Dr. Matthews's latest research data, but another news notification caught his eye. Spencer Carr released after serving 5 years. Former board member completes sentence, barred from corporate position. The accompanying photo showed a weathered Spencer Carr leaving federal prison, a far cry from the calculating corporate executive who had conspired with Marshall for decades. His extensive cooperation with investigators had earned him a reduced sentence, but his role in suppressing life-saving medical research had ensured he would never work in the pharmaceutical industry again. A gentle knock preceded Violet Wells's entrance. Though she'd been offered promotions countless times, she remained Grant's executive assistant, her loyalty during the crisis having deepened their professional relationship into one of mutual respect and trust. "The quarterly reports you requested," she said, placing a folder on his desk. "And I thought you should know. Chelsea Trevino's daughter graduated from medical school yesterday. Top of her class at Johns Hopkins." Grant nodded, remembering the scared teenager whose medical bills had once made her mother vulnerable to Marshall's manipulation. The trust he'd established for Sophie Trevino's medical care had evolved into a full scholarship, turning a story of exploitation into one of redemption. "How's Chelsea doing at the foundation?" he asked. "Excelling," Violet replied. "The Pharmaceutical Industry Ethics Foundation she established with her settlement money has already influenced policy in 3 countries. Her experience with Marshall made her particularly effective at identifying and preventing corporate exploitation. The foundation had been Chelsea's way of transforming her years of documenting corporate corruption into something positive. Her meticulous nature, once used to protect herself from Marshall's schemes, now helped draft legislation to prevent similar abuses in the industry." Grant's computer chimed, a reminder of his upcoming video call with Emma. He glanced at the family photos on his desk, marking the progression of their lives. Emma at her middle school graduation, both of them skiing in the Alps during their last vacation, a recent shot of them with his new wife, Sarah. He'd met Sarah 2 years after Christina's sentencing, though they didn't begin dating until months later. As the head of pediatric oncology at Mount Sinai, she'd reached out to discuss Lynch Pharmaceuticals' cancer treatment trials. Their shared commitment to putting patients first had led to a partnership that extended beyond the professional. A text message lit up his phone. Marcus, now 15, asking about college preparation advice. Though Grant had stepped back from the role of father, he'd remained a mentor figure in the boy's life, available for guidance while respecting the boundaries with Marcus's biological father, David Chun. The arrangement had evolved naturally. David, a successful executive at Morgan Stanley, had proven to be an excellent father, helping Marcus understand his complex family history with remarkable grace. The trust fund Grant had established ensured Marcus's future opportunities, while regular mentoring calls maintained a connection that, while different from before, remained meaningful. His thoughts were interrupted by another news alert. Christina Pearson Lynch complete sentence, begins speaking tour. Former corporate spouse shares cautionary tale of industry corruption. The article included a recent photo of Christina speaking at a business ethics conference. Her 3-year sentence, reduced further for good behavior, had ended 18 months ago. She'd used her time in prison to earn a master's degree in ethics and had transformed her experience into a crusade for corporate accountability. Her relationship with Emma had evolved into something healthier, built on honesty and careful boundaries. Weekly supervised visits had gradually expanded to include school events and holiday celebrations, though trust remained a delicate issue. Emma's therapist had helped her understand the complexities of her mother's choices while maintaining strong bonds with her father and stepmother. "Sir?" Violet's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Agent Carver is on line 1. She says it's about Marshall's latest appeal." Desiree Carver had been promoted to lead the FBI's Corporate Crimes Division, her success with the Gallagher case having established her reputation. She'd maintained contact with Grant, their professional relationship having evolved into a friendship built on mutual respect. "Grant," her familiar voice carried a note of satisfaction. "Thought you'd want to know. We found new evidence of Marshall's activities from before Christina's involvement. 3 more cases of suppressed research, 2 in cancer treatments. The appeals court just denied his latest petition. He'll serve the full 25 years. The news brought Grant no joy, only a sense of justice served. The patients who had died waiting for treatments Marshall had delayed would never see vindication, but at least their stories had helped prevent future corporate predators from following his path. His computer chimed again. Emma was calling. Grant smiled as his daughter's face filled the screen, her excitement palpable as she launched into a story about her latest science project. Sarah appeared in his office doorway, arriving for their lunch date, and settled quietly on the sofa to wait. Her presence a reminder of how life could surprise you with happiness even after devastating betrayal. His office, so different from that evening 6 years ago when he'd first discovered Christina's betrayal. The company had not just survived but thrived. The cancer drug had saved thousands of lives. New board members Amanda Schmidt and Derek Whitehead, had helped build a corporate culture where ethics weren't just buzzwords but fundamental principles. His phone buzzed with another text, a photo from Chelsea of her daughter Sophie in graduation robes, proudly holding her medical degree. The caption read, "From victim to healer. Thank you for making this possible." Grant thought about the transformations the years had brought. Marshall Gallagher, once the titan of the pharmaceutical industry, now served his days in federal prison. Spencer Carr had emerged chastened and reformed. Christina had transformed her guilt into advocacy. Chelsea had turned her pain into positive change. And he had found his way to a life more genuine than the perfect facade he'd once maintained. The scandal had generated changes beyond their personal lives. New legislation, dubbed the Gallagher Laws, now required stricter oversight of pharmaceutical research and development. Chelsea's foundation worked to protect whistleblowers and expose corporate corruption. Lynch Pharmaceuticals had become a model for ethical corporate governance, proving that profit and principle could coexist. Emma's voice brought him back to the present. "Dad, is Mom still coming to my school presentation next month?" "Yes, sweetheart," he replied, catching Sarah's supportive smile from the sofa. "We'll all be there, your mom, Sarah, and me." David said he might bring Marcus too, if his schedule permits. It wasn't the family he'd imagined having, but it was real, built on truth and resilience rather than pretense and manipulation. The betrayal that had shattered his perfect life had led to something more meaningful, a life where relationships were genuine, success was ethical, and happiness was built on honesty. As he ended the call with Emma and prepared to join Sarah for lunch, Grant reflected on the journey. The Manhattan skyline behind him stood as a testament to the enduring nature of truth, how it could hurt, heal, and ultimately lead to transformation. The perfect life he'd lost had been replaced by something better, a life of authentic relationships, meaningful work, and the knowledge that even the greatest betrayals could lead to profound growth. The scandal that had rocked the pharmaceutical industry had faded into history, but its lessons endured. Marshall Gallagher's empire of lies had crumbled, but from its ruins had risen something stronger, a legacy of truth, ethical leadership, and the understanding that real success came not from power or perfection, but from integrity and the courage to face life's hardest truths. As Grant and Sarah left for lunch, the afternoon sun caught the Lynch Pharmaceuticals logo, the double helix still turning slowly against the sky, now a symbol not just of scientific advancement, but of ethical progress. The company his grandfather had started in a Brooklyn garage had become something he never could have imagined, a force for good in an industry forever changed by the exposure of its darkest secrets. The perfect life was gone, but in its place stood something far more valuable, a life of authentic purpose, genuine love, and the deep satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the greatest falls can lead to the most meaningful ascents. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.